Ladies and gentlemen, please kindly check the rules of Jesica 2021 and hopefully for all participants can comply with the rules. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, please kindly check the rules of Jesica 2021 and hopefully for all participants can comply with the rules. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our event is about to begin. Please turn on your camera and turn off your microphone. And before the event begin, here is the teaser video about our event. Happy watching.
It's globally admitted that economic sustainability plays important role in the worldwide social and economic from the US in the west to Europe in the east. And from Robben Island in the South Africa to Cafe Kabloon in Greenland in the north. It is not too much if we think that our future depends on the sustainability of sustainable economy. From machine to big data, from growth to distribution, from natural resources to finance, from social to economic, and from health to education. Economic sustainability refers to best practice that support the long-term economic development of a nation that includes is a goal that very few organizations achieve despite a fairly universal understanding of what types of business practice. For example, burning of fossil fuels, creating food waste, leveraging harmful manufacturing methods, and of course contribute to climate change. The COVID-19 pandemic and other current economic transformation have affected the pace of economic change in the whole world, and it has impacted the global economic crisis. In order to maintain the sustainability of the economic system with the current economic situation and challenges, new explanation is urgently needed in creating scientific methodologies, economic analysis, and government policy. Economic and Business Faculty from Universitas Pembangunan Nasional Veteran Jakarta proudly present the first Jakarta Economic Sustainability International Conference Agenda. International Conference and Call of Papers. The theme that we will discuss of this agenda is the pandemic of COVID-19 and the Great Transformation. The annual conference is to promote and update work on economic sustainability and current economic challenges, and also to increase the awareness of the possibility of different approaches in economic and its methodology. So guys, please welcome the first Jakarta Economic Sustainability International Conference Agenda.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, greeting of virtue, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Liza Febrina. It is a wonderful and precious chance for me to be your master of ceremony in this beautiful event, Jakarta Economic Sustainability International Conference Agenda 2021. First of all, let's give thanks to God Almighty for giving a lot of grace and blessing so we could gather together in this beautiful event. In this beautiful moment, I would like to welcome the Honorable Dr. Dian Wicaksi Arif Tiara, SEAK, MAK, CA, CSRS, as the Dean of the Faculty of Economic and Business, UPN Veteran Jakarta, the Honorable Professor Oscar Ogartese from Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico as today's speaker, the Honorable Dr. Muhammad Fadil Hasan, Senior Economist Indonesia as today's speakers, the Honorable Mr. Ahmad Nur Hidayat, MPP, as today moderator, and also all participants of Jesica 2021. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we would like to thank everyone for taking time to attend our event today, Jesica 2021. First of all, let us pray to God Almighty based on individual belief, but in today's event, the prayer will be led by Mr. Ade Nur Rahim, SHIMAE. To Mr. Ade Nur Rahim, the time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Wabihi nasta'inu ala umuri dunya waddin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin sayyidina Maulana Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. A'udzu billahi minasyaitonir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Hamdan syakirin, hamdan na'imin, hamdan yuwafi ni'amahu wa yukafi'u mazidah. Ya Rabbana lakal hamdu kama yanbaghi li jalali wajhikal karim wa 'azimi sultanik. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا ولوالدينا وارحمهم كما ربونا صغارا. ولجميع المسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات. اللهم اجعلنا وذريتنا وتلاميذنا وأهلنا من أهل العلم وأهل الخير وأهل القرآن وأهل التقى، ولا تجعلنا وإياهم من أهل الجهل وأهل الضيق. اللهم اجعل هذا الجمع جمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وأدخلنا الجنة مع الأبرار يا عزيز يا غفار يا رب العالمين. صلى الله على خير خلقه محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Ade, for leading the praying session today. Before we enter today's event, we would like to invite the chairman of Jesica 2021 for giving the welcoming remark for us. To Mr. Fahru Nofrian, PhD, the time is yours.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good evening, Professor Oscar. It is our great honor to have you in today's conference. Jesica, as I said in the welcoming remark, Jesica aims to promote new economic explanation and also to discuss current challenges. The experience that Professor Oscar will explain in his presentation about Mexico, it will be interesting, and also the experience of Indonesia that will be explained by Dr. Fadil Hasan. We also thank you to all participants that already here this morning. Please welcome to the first Jesica conference. Okay, MC.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Faru, for the welcoming remark. And now we will hold a photo session. The keynote speaker, the dean, as well as participants are welcome to take a position. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Thank you so much, everyone. Dear ladies and gentlemen, the next session is the webinar and discussion that will be handled by Honorable Moderator, Mr. Ahmad Nur Hidayat, MPP. Before that, I want to introduce Mr. Ahmad first. Mr. Ahmad Nur Hidayat, MPP, is a lecturer and also a researcher in UPN Veteran Jakarta. He is also a head of Analyst Supervisory Board of Bank Indonesia. He is sometimes being a speaker and moderator at Narasi Institute. He got her bachelor degree in engineering from University of Indonesia. He also got her master degree and exchange program in Tsinghua University of China. He also got her master of public policy from National University of Singapore. And he also have executive education in Harvard School of Government. He have a lot of achievement, such as being a Secretary of Worker Joint Group of President Jokowi, National Economic and Industrial Committee for Labor or Human Capital and Research Development. Without any further ado, now, please welcome Mr. Ahmad Nur Hidayat. The time is yours.
Thank you very much for your and very exciting introduction, Ms. Liza as the MC. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, Jakarta. Good morning, good evening in Mexico City. For the special our distinguished speakers, Professor Oscar Ogartese Galarza. Let me check your voice first, Professor. Can you hear me, Professor? Hello?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first Jakarta Economic Sustainability International Conference Agenda 2021. This session is the third series of the webinar international sessions aiming to give inspiration to everyone to share and learn together about the transformation of our life due to the pandemic COVID-19. If you're interested in the economic, financial order, foreign affairs, and the meaning of the political, economic, and the other life improvement, this is the right place for you. In the previous session, we have interesting knowledge regarding the sustainability and the circular economy during the pandemic. This time, we are going to have another interesting session from our distinguished speakers, which are Professor Oscar Ogartese Galarza. Welcome, Prof.
Thank you.
And Dr. Fadil Hassan, who become a senior economist in Indonesia. Is a very famous senior economist. Although this Zoom meeting brought in the English, please you using in the English and then follow the instruction that given to you in the earlier sessions. And I also want to reminding you some notes. First, today is being recorded to be available for the viewing post conference. So if you keep your computer mute, it is better because we want to focus to our speakers. If you have any questions to the presenters, to our guests here, please use the chat feature in this Zoom seminar webinar. Sorry, you can also submit a question via the chat feature on the face-to-face as long as you are have the permission from me as the moderator. So if you have any technical question, please direct out to chat with our co-host in the chat conference room. Okay, before we start, we want to introduce briefly about our speakers. The first speaker, which is the Professor Oscar Ogartese. He is the senior researcher from the Instituto de Investigazione Economica UNEM. I'm sorry for the spelling, Prof. He also the member of the National System of Researchers CONACYT level 3. He have the bachelor from the finance in the Fordham University in the New York, and they have finance in London Business School, University of London, and also the PhD in the History and Philosophy University of Bergen in 2000 and 2007. He is the Doctor Honoris Clausa, Universidad Nacional de San Agustin, Arequipa, Peru, and he also won the 2021 Research Award of the National University of Mexico. He has a very broad, interesting, but especially interested in the international finance architecture, Latin American financial regular integrations, and the history of the Latin America. So, welcome to you, Professor. So another speakers we have here is Mr. Fadil Hasan. Dr. Fadil Hasan, he was the senior economist from the INF. So he also corporate affairs director in the PT Inti Indonesia Subur Asian Agri Group. He has Bachelor Agriculture Pertanian Bogor IPB, Master Economic in Department of Economic, Iowa State University USA, and Doctoral Agriculture Economics Department of the Agriculture Economics of Kennedy University of Kentucky. I'm sorry. He became the Vice President Expert Team for the Economic President of the K. Haji Ma'ruf Amin. So we will start with our first speaker, which is the professor. The time is yours, Prof, for 30 minutes for your presentations. Please.
Okay, 20 or 30?
30.
30. Okay,
yes.
Fine. Thank you very much. First of all, I want to express how happy I am to have been invited to Jakarta. I had the illusion I was going to take a plane and go to Jakarta and eat fantastic food. And then I was told that no, I was going to stay home and do it by Zoom because we still have the pandemic. Thank you all for this invitation. I realize I am the only Latin American in this group, this very selective group of senior lecturers, and I hope I won't let you down. I want to start by, I'm going to share. Let me see how I do this. Okay. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, sir.
Yes? Okay.
Clearly.
Okie doke. I am going to speak about the shift in the international economic axis and the new international financial order. Because the year 2020 has been a year that shaped the future. And I am now speaking from the past. Here I am on Friday night into the future. There you're on Saturday morning. The shift into the future is a shift from the West to the East. We have had, for the past 20 years, G7 countries with very slow growth, while Asian countries grew very fast. And this, particularly after the 2008 crisis, gave way to a two-pronged recovery. A very fast recovery in Asia and a very slow recovery in the West. Asian growth has been very high since the 1980s with miraculous numbers, in quotes, in Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, and China, to name a few. And starting from very different points, GDPs per capita began to converge with the US GDP per capita. Now this is something new. An explanation for this, as far as I can see, and I'm using Robert Wade and his marvelous book on Korea, but others, is that all economies of Asia started an integration process using reverse engineering, high levels of education, very high levels of education, and massive public resources into industry. Picking the winners has been an Asian characteristic. The West, in turn, went past its industrial peak when it decided that outsourcing was the way forward and began to lose employment at home while having and creating major external deficits. The slowdowns in the West were accompanied by increased fiscal deficits, both in the US and Europe, with no evidence that those deficits have injected either an investment multiplier nor a consumption one in the spirit of Keynes. The result of a slow West and a fast-growing East is with a deregulation of the financial sector, is that a process of increasing financial crisis has demanded growing financial resources to prevent major catastrophes in the economy. And this has been so in the West increasingly since the 1980s and over the past 20 years particularly. The concept of too big to fail came to town. As it happens, financial institutions that are too big to fail have no risk because they cannot fail. The risk is failure. If you cannot fail, there is no risk. And that means they can gamble anything. And if anything goes wrong, the federal government, the central government of the country, will rescue them. And this is particularly the case in the United States, but it is also the case in Great Britain and in Europe. What has happened over the past 3 decades is that world income concentration has grown country by country. So while GDPs have converged between the Asian countries and the West, inside the economies in the West, the Gini index rose. We have growing inequalities inside the economies. So we have this paradox where the countries are converging, some countries are converging with the richer countries of the G7, but inside the Western countries, what we have is increased inequalities. And this is also true for Latin America and Africa. Now, the COVID crisis of 2020 has shown us a world that contracted. The world in 2020 shrunk. China was the sole large economy to grow, thus changing its future growth trajectory as the G7 countries shrunk and the US contracted slightly. What this means is that while the West shrunk and its growth trajectory then changed course, in Asia, China did not shrink and continued with its previous trajectory. And that means that China will reach a GDP per capita with the US sooner rather than later. Here we have what happened in 2020. And what you can see here is that Latin America and the Caribbean lost nearly 10%, 8.5% of GDP growth. That's what it lost. And this is the missing growth here, which is 3.5%. That means that Latin America has changed its growth trajectory, and it's now slower than it was, and it was slow before. Equally, the United Kingdom has shrunk by 10%. That has given its missed 5% growth, so the UK will grow rather slowly from now on forward, and its growth trajectory will be slower than what it was previously. The euro area shrunk by 7%, 6.8%, and they have missed 3.5% of GDP growth, so that they have also changed their growth trajectory for the future. It is slower. The United States shrunk by 3.5%, which was compensated by this growth. They have not missed any growth, but the fact that they shrunk means they have also changed their growth trajectory. China here did not shrink. It continued growing. And in 2021, it has been growing very healthily. And ASEAN plus 5 has been growing very healthily in 2021, and it shrunk slightly, 4% in the past year. But the fact that it has recovered so strongly gives it a strong future. So this, where I'm trying to drive at, is that while Asia was growing fast and will continue growing fast, even if it will not grow as fast as it was growing before, in the West, the economies were growing slowly, and they will grow even less in the future because the growth trajectory has shifted. And this will make a convergence of GDPs in the East and West more possible sooner rather than later. Now, we have seen here the United States, how it shrunk and recovered in 2021 at a high growth rate. Now, what is happening in the US? What we have seen is that if you follow the red line here is the balance on current account. This is their deficit, external deficit, in billions of dollars. Now, this deficit needs to be financed. And as you can see, capital inflows into the US are the mirror image of the external sector deficit, right? So this is a reflection of this. Further down, the deficit has grown even more, and the external financing has grown even more. Now, the question is, who invests in US treasuries and who invests in the stock market? Because here you have a problem, no? When we look at this and we say it is external financing that goes into the United States, the question is who? Who is financing the United States? And here we have the rich countries, the light green numbers. They used to finance in 2003 roughly half of the total deficit. Now they finance roughly 1/3 of the total deficit. The international financial, 24% of the external deficit. This means the financial centers, the rich people and the rich investment firms are investing into US treasuries and into the US stock market. The third is the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which in the year 2000 roughly put in 6% of the US deficit. Now they put in 10, this is about 8, that's 18, and plus another 3, that's 21% of the total US deficit is financed by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The difference, which is the yellow lines here, which used to be 30% of the total US deficit, is now reduced to 22% roughly. This is the developing world. That's the yellow line. So between the blue lines, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which are the large developing countries, and the yellow lines, what you have roughly is that about half of the US deficit is financed by the developing world, be it central banks or private investors. This means that international finance today does not serve the original end, which was to transfer wealth from the richer countries to the poorer countries. Now international finance serves to transfer resources from the poorer countries to the richer countries. And I think that is not right. Now here, we have what instruments foreign residents are holding their money in the United States. You have public securities. These are treasury bills and bonds, the light blue, and private securities, which is the green line. The blue line is held by central banks. And that went, this is 2011. This is a decade ago. They have gone from 500, what is it? What's the number? It's $5 trillion. They have gone up to about $8 trillion. This is central banks. Now, how can central banks increase the level of investment in US Treasury bills in the period between 2011 and 2021, in those 10 years? The only way to do this is by having adjustment policies that maintain imports down, and while holding imports down, international reserve positions go up. So central banks have more reserves. But that, of course, means depressing wages in the developing world in order to transfer those resources from the developing world to the United States. The difference, which is private securities, is, of course, money from the financial centers and from the G7 countries, as well as some rich people from the developing world. And that this adds up to this blue line up here. This is the total amount of US debt, which is about $25 trillion, roughly. Now, here we have who are the holders of the public securities by region. The major region that is financing the US deficit is Asia. Asia led by China. They used to finance roughly 70% of the total amount. They now finance less than 60% of the total amount. It still is a massive amount of money. It is followed by Europe, that raised its share from 20 to 30%, and the 10% balance is held by Latin America and Africa. Now, financing the US external deficit means you're lending money for the buyer to buy from you. That's what it means. That's really what's going on. What we're having now is Asia financing the US so the US is able to import from Asia what it needs. Now, is that an international order we want? Is that an international order that is just? Or should, maybe, the US economy come to terms with its productivity problems and have its adjustments so that they don't absorb international resources from the rest of the world? Worst of all, because they have argued all along that the China surplus is the result of China pushing its goods on US consumers, which I think is a mistaken interpretation. What we have is an overconsumption in the United States due to very high wages that are financed by the rest of us while they have slow economic growth. And that's why they have the external deficit. They are over-consuming because they have very high wages. The wages are way over their productivity levels, and that should be adjusted, and that would rebalance the global economy. But what is happening now is that Asia is financing the US for the US to consume Asian goods, and Latin America is financing the US. I'm not sure for what, because they are not consuming Latin American goods. So I don't know. What we have is the adjustment policies that contain growth around the world. 130 countries, if I remember correctly, have adjustment policies and austerity policies going on, according to Isabel Ortiz's research. And so with austerity policies, international reserves go up. And as international reserves go up, that money goes into buying US bonds and treasury bills to finance the US deficit. Now, what we have here that is wrong, and very wrong, is the interest rates. Interest rates for US treasury bills, short term, are negative and have been negative for the past 2 decades. And they are openly negative. They are not slightly negative. It's not minus 0.5%. Here we're speaking of, in the end, in 2021, it is nearly 6% negative. And it has been in the 2 to 3% range over the past decade, between 2010 and 2020. And in the first decade, it went down to the below 1%. So what happens when interest rates are very low? Two things happen. The first thing that happens is that you have a profitability problem. The second problem is that you have a distortion in the stock markets and in the commodity markets, because you can borrow money for free to invest in the stock markets and in the commodity markets. In fact, you're given the money for free. You can take the money at minus 6%, as if you're a large investment fund. You take the money, you borrow the money at minus 6% and put it in the stock market. And you create a stock market boom. And it appears to be real, and of course it is not real. It is just these negative interest rates that are distorting economic activities. However, these negative interest rates are not pushing investment, real investment. So capital investment in the United States is not growing in spite of the fact that there are negative interest rates. And one reason could be because perhaps interest rates are an expression of profit rates. And if it is the case, if it were the case, then we have a profitability problem in the United States that must be solved first. So what we now have, and with this I will finish, what we just have is that the largest economy borrows from the developing countries in order to finance an enlarged overconsumption due to high wages and low GDP growth. In exchange, the rest of the world needs to adjust consumption downwards in order for international reserves to grow and help finance this larger US external deficit. The result is that while the US public debt grows at 7% annual rate since 2000, GDP grows only by 1.9% annually. This gives way to an over-indebted country, which is the case of the United States. China has divested some of its US debt by around $300 billion since 2011. Malaysia has divested some $6 billion. Indonesia remains with the same position of US government debt of $24 billion. And others have accumulated even larger positions. Singapore by 118 billion, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam are some examples. So what we have is Asia accumulating US government debt, financing the US government deficit, and the US basically doing nothing with its high level of wages and its low productivity and the lack of capital investment. And that's the situation today. What we now have, as we started by saying, is a shift in the economic axis from the Atlantic to the Pacific Oceans, as Europe will grow very slowly and the US as well. And what we have now is in the Atlantic, in Asia, fast-growing countries. And this, from the point of view of trade and investment, is unquestionable. The yuan remains a marginal currency in terms of international reserves. Paradoxically, the US remains the single most traded currency in the world, and it has the shape of US public debt. No? The largest debtor in the world holds the main international currency and essentially has converted the international financial order into one where lesser developed economies finance the most developed economy to hold a given consumption pattern in spite of its slow economic growth. And this requires, of course, massive and growing external deficits. With this, I just wish to say that I don't think this is sustainable. I don't think it is possible to continue financing perpetually growing deficit in the United States while they do not do anything with their wages and they do nothing with their capital investments, which are not growing, and they are not changing their energy matrix, which is today essential. Energy matrix change is now led by China, as we all know. China is a country that's investing the most in Latin America, at least, in clean energies, be it in the consumption of clean energies in mass transport vehicles, or be it in the generation of clean energies with hydroelectrics, solar, and eolic energy. But that should be accompanied by a US investment in the same areas is not. And what we now have is a war where the US resents that they have lost their leadership and blames everything on China, which is a nonsense. That's ridiculous, but that's the case. And that's the new international order, and that is the new international financial order. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Oscar, with your very interesting thought. And I think one point that I have the highlight here, the declining of the West today and the rising of the East, especially China, is more worried in the world, and the US, especially the Western country, lost leadership in the new international order and the financial order, as you mentioned. So this is will emerge the instability when you said in your session about the possibility of war and the possibility of the more conflict in Indonesia in the world. So it's become the more challenging world in the future. So maybe I will have a brief question to you, Professor Oscar, regarding with the moment in 2022 in Jakarta and Indonesia and Bali also, we have the host of the G20. Yes, G20 in Bali and in the NTB, Nusa Tenggara Barat. So regarding this event, in Indonesia become the host and Indonesia become the presidency of the G20. So what kind of the agenda you propose to Indonesia and to another leader in the world to prevent instability in the near future? Like you mentioned before, the declining imbalances of the trade and also the challenging of the economic US facing today. And China also have the more aggressive policy in terms of the infrastructure projects, etc. So how we as the emerging country in the middle income country see the conflict is not beneficial for us, for all of us. So what's your agenda, your suggestion to
the first thing I want to remind something I wrote in Seoul in, I think it was 2010. I wrote in the Asia Times then an article called An Imbalanced Summit. And the point of my article was that the G20 is the meeting of the largest debtors in the world, which are the G7 countries, with the largest creditors in the world. But the rules of the game are placed by the debtors. That makes no sense. Our position as emerging countries has to be to put rules of the game. Has to be to stop with this process of financing the deficits of the rich countries. We should be financing our development. We should not be having adjustment policies. We should be having growth, sustainable growth, with increased use of international reserves and an improvement in wages to improve income distribution. Income distribution has deteriorated in our countries because of the adjustment policies. We need to reverse that. We need to improve income distribution, and the only way to improve income distribution is to spend more. That means more public spending, improvement in wages, and a recovery of growth, a reduction in international reserves, and we will not be financing those deficits, and they will have to adjust. So it is one way or the other. But I think it is ridiculous that we adjust and reduce our wages in order for others to have high wages and keep on having these deficits. And why do we do this? Because they consume what we produce. Well, why don't we consume what we produce? So, you know, there's a logic here. I mean, 7 countries cannot be the ones that pull the rules of the game when they owe the world everything. It's not logical. And I have heard people say, no, G7 countries don't owe the world. G7 countries finance themselves. Well, those numbers that I have just shown you show That's false.
That's not true. Yeah.
And I was, in fact, when I started doing 6 months ago, when I started putting the data together for this conference, I thought I was going to find domestic financing of the deficits until I was at a conference in London, I think it was, of the World Economic Association, and a colleague from the US Treasury said, we could not possibly have the external deficit we have if we did not have external financing. But that's because rich people in the developing world are financing us. But as it turns out, it's not the rich people only, it's the central banks. And it's the central banks because of the adjustment policies. So we're growing our reserves because with adjustment policies to finance them. That's ridiculous. And we have to change that. I think that's a main point of agenda. The other main point of agenda is this thing of putting the blame of the US deficits on the surplus countries ignores the fact of the US macroeconomic disequilibria. And none of us, neither them nor us, can ignore those disequilibria because they are the largest disequilibria in the world. It's the elephant in the room, as I wrote in an article not long ago. It is the elephant in the room. We're all holding the elephant up there. Well, how about the elephant coming down from the rope and getting itself on a diet? But that, I mean, we need, as host countries, we need to let it be clear that we cannot continue concentrating income in our countries in order to finance those deficits while they do nothing to reduce the deficits. And if the deficits led to increased economic growth, great. Keynes was right. Yes, there is more consumption, and yes, there is more investment. It's not the case. What we are seeing is growing deficits, and nothing happens with investment multiplier, nor with the consumption multiplier. Or if it happens outwards, and it goes into the external account. Nothing happens domestically. So if they are not improving their domestic productivity, what are they doing? I mean, if we were to go to the US with the IMF, with the way the IMF comes to our countries, we would have to say, look, you have to raise your productivity, put your house in order, balance your budget, raise your taxes, and let's go forward. But that, because they are the exceptional countries, that doesn't happen. Now, are we going to continue financing this? Is that the reasonable thing to do? How do we improve our economic growth and our income distribution if we do not stop having these adjustment policies, which are ridiculous? I mean, these austerity policies all over the place. For this, that doesn't make any sense.
Thank you, Professor. Very interesting agenda that you suggest to our next international G20 meeting. Okay, I'll look at the participant already has hand, Dr. Aswin, but I not continue for the Q&A session now. We will continue with another speakers, Dr. Fadil, and after that, we will going to discussion with all of you. So do not forget to keep your questions. Maybe it's better when you have the time you chat. You have the question in the chat room, and maybe not all of you can speak directly to the speakers, but I will choose which one have the best questions and can directly go to the speakers. So I will greeting with to Mr. Fadil. Pak Fadil, do you hear my voice? I cannot hear your voice, Pak. Can you unmute your voice, Pak?
Yes, good morning.
Good
And then
morning.
good evening for Professor Oscar.
Thank you, Pak Father, already coming to these international sessions because you are from Indonesia and you are very serious thoughts about the transformations economic during the pandemic. Please give the time to us the 30 minutes to have the presentation. So the time is yours, Pak.
Thank you very much, Ahmad Nur Hidayat, as a moderator for this session, and also distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, especially for Professor Oscar from Mexico. Happy to hear that you participate in this international seminar organized by the University of Veteran Jakarta. So I heard your presentation. I think it's very interesting. So I just would like to complement what you are taught. Then we're gonna have a fruitful discussion later on. So let me share my presentation here, if I may.
Yes, Pak, please. You can share it.
Okay. So yes, my presentation. The title is Economic Transformation After Pandemic COVID-19. So to begin with, just would like to remind all of us that even before pandemic COVID-19, I think the world economy had very high uncertainty. If we remember in 2019, late 2019, the bank issued a report titled "Darkening Skies," because at that time I think the World Bank saw that there is some uncertainty and risk in the world economy, and then that is because of the several factors that I would like to explain briefly to you. First of all, there was a risk of recession as shown by the inverse curve yield of U.S. bond, in which that the short-term bond was higher than the long-term bond. And then also at that time we saw a world trade war between the U.S. and the China, and then the commodity price also was low because of the low demand, and then also because of the unilateralism conducted by the Trump administration, we see that the global economic cooperation was under threat, And then also we saw another important variable where the China was entering the new path of low economic growth, and then fiscal expansion continue in the U.S. U.S. deficit is widened, China loosened its fiscal policy, and also EU was under crisis of the recovery. And then as we saw for a long time, Japan, another important world economy, also was struggling from the stagflation, mainly because of the aging society. In the domestic market, in the domestic economy, we saw that the domestic economic growth was not optimal, and because of there was unsolved structural economic problem with respect to the investment, high economic costs, corruption, and so on and so forth. So then that was the situation before the pandemic, and then we entered the pandemic period starting in 2020. Even up to now for some countries or most of the countries, and then starting in 2021, I think the global economy recovered rather fast, but also was followed by the inflationary pressure. The inflationary pressure itself, I think, come from the what do you call it, this disruption in the logistical or in the supply chains of the goods and services around the world, because of the sudden increase in the demand was not matched up by the enough supplies. So there is this logistical and supply chains problem. This caused the inflationary pressure in some of the countries, especially in the US, as shown in October, for example, this CPI increased around 6.3%, and in China also the PPI, the producer index, also increased, but by almost 13%. And then also there is another aspect of this recovery in the world economy, in which there is an equality in the recovery of the economy between the developed and the developing or the less developed countries, because of the what I call it, this vaccination problems, while the developed economy has already reached around 60% of the population completed by the vaccine. The less developed countries only reach around or less than one digit in the vaccination program. So this is what we see, at least at present, how then we address this and how this will affect the transformation of the economy in the near future. That's something we are going to discuss. And now in the domestic economy in Indonesia, we saw also the economic growth start to recover in the second quarter of this year, after we had negative, or we had a recession in 2020, and then in 2021, in the second quarter, the growth is around 7%, but then declining to 3.5% in the second quarter, and then in the third quarter, the growth is around 3.51%. So while we are entering this recovery in our domestic market, but still I think very fragile because of this threat of the vaccination. The threat of the COVID-19, the vaccination program, and also maybe later on we're gonna see how the inflationary pressure from the world economy will also affect the recovery that we have in domestic economy. Now, this also shown that the sectoral growth in the third quarter of 2021 in the economy, mainly driven by the export driven growth, where, as you can see here, that the because of the increase in the price of commodities, where Indonesia export still largely depend on the natural resource products. This is encourage the export to increase, and then this is mainly the factors that make growth in the economy in Indonesia higher than before. Now also we can see here that the distribution of the growth in the economy in Indonesia, we divided here between Sumatra and Java. Why? Because Sumatra is the island that of very much main contribution to the export of Indonesia. And then we can see here that the growth in Sumatra is higher than in the rest of the islands in Indonesia. Now, this is also figure that show the vaccination in Indonesia and then in the other countries. Where in Indonesia, I think vaccination program still a bit low than the other countries. Yeah. So this is also will affect what is going to happen in the recovery in economy in Indonesia, and for that also in many countries. Okay, so this is that I mentioned before about the export into 2021, which is higher than the export in 2019 before pandemic COVID-19. And again, I think the reason for this is because the price of the commodity that is increased significantly, yeah, during and after the COVID-19. This is the what do you call it, the value of export, yeah, of natural gas, natural resources that we have, yeah. And now this is the highest oil prices in the last 5 years. We see that the oil prices has reached the highest in the last 5 years. So this is also contribute to the export, yeah, and then for that also to the growth in the economy in Indonesia. Many question how long this increase in price commodity will last. You know, several study shows that maybe this price increase in the commodity or the trend of price increase in the commodity will last up to the first semester or the first quarter in 2022. You know, and if this is true, then I think we have also to prepare what is happen after that. You know, if we we had experience in 2008, 2009, and we had a global financial crisis. We saw that you know, this price increase in the commodity, as Professor Oscar mentioned, not is because of the increase in the demand, but mainly because of the quantitative easing that been what they call it, adopted by this many countries, yeah, and then this fund flows to the commodity market, you know. But if this then been what they call it, this phenomena stop, then I think we are going to see the drop in the price commodity as we experienced in 2008 and 2009. So the thing here is that we have really to be very careful, you know, not to rely upon the increase in the price commodity as a ways, you know, to what they call it, to recover from the crisis of the recession. And then I think we have to make structural reform in our export what do you call it, industries, you know, not to rely upon the natural resource commodities. Now this is what I mean by this structural transformation, that what we need here in Indonesia. If we see this, the fact is that our manufacturing industry share in the GDP, in fact, is declining. Yeah, and then if these things continue to happen, and then we enjoy this export growth and then the economic growth from the increase in the price commodity, and it is going to be very problematic in the future, since if the price of commodity drop and then this manufacturing has not been has not been increased their contribution to the GDP, then I think we are going to have long-lasting problem in our economy. So that's why when we predict what is going to happen in the economy in Indonesia, whether we are going to have some recovery path in Indonesia, whether it's going to resemble the V, what do you call it, shape, or the W shape, or the K shape. That is, I think, is going to be very, what do you call it, interesting that we discuss it, yeah, later on, But I think what are going to happen here is in the economy, as Professor Oscar mentioned before. Maybe what we are going to have is the K-shape, in which some of the sector in the economy, mainly like economy that is very that is very the economy, the sector in the economy, yeah, like the digital economy, the health and services industries is going to recover. Then the other in the economy, and if that happen, I think we are going to see also the widening in the inequality in the economy. So to make the discussion shorter, here is some trend in the economy, but that we see in the future during that after pandemic COVID-19. First of all, is that we had an increase in the public debt, because all countries adopting the fiscal stimulus and increase the fiscal deficit. And then also we gonna see the decline in the value of currency, with the risk that capital flight and flight to the equality, especially when I think the US start to adopt the tapering off and then increasing their the Fed fund rate. That's something also that we have to really look at to these things, And then another trend in the economy that we are going to see is that the automatization and the digitalization of the economy, accelerating the e-commerce, mobile banking, digital branch, telemedicine revolution, digital and online education, hygiene economy, and then local tourism. So the world tourism, I think because of the COVID-19, I think we will not recover as fast as that we see in the local tourism. And then also, we're gonna see this new word global supply chains, in which I think some of the countries or many countries try to less dependency on China, and also as Professor Oscar mentioned about how then we what do you call it, try to protect our own economy, so but whether or not it's going to transform into many countries adopting the protectionism, that's another things, And then finally, also because of the concern in the climate change, global warming, and I think we're going to see also in the future, together with COVID-19, there will be a transition or more transition to the green economy. Yeah, but also I think we have to very careful in these things, because as we can see right now that the transition to the green economy has created also disruption, yeah, and then the lack of the supply in the energy, fossil energy, yeah. This in the short term, I think, will also create disruption in the logistical, and then also in the inflationary pressure that we are now see in the many countries. Now, finally, in terms of the Indonesian economy, I think the trend in the Indonesian economy in the future, we're gonna have the economic recovery that will take longer, and then resembles like U or W shape instead of the V shape, yeah. And then also, I think the role of the government in the economy will be bigger and more important through various intervention measures, yeah, especially in the digital economy and in the transition to the green economy. And then another aspect is that the economic capacity, I think, will not back to the previous condition, especially in the short term or in the medium term, yeah. So, and then there will be different type of recovery in the economy. Some sectors will recover faster than the others, and then others maybe take long to recover. And also, as I mentioned before, the economic inequality among the sectors, among region, among the income groups will be widened because of this pandemic COVID-19. Yeah. But another possibility that we have also in the future is that there is a potential increase in the foreign direct investment due to the regulation of the investment from China. And then there will be in the new global supply chains in which I think Indonesia has potential to capture this opportunity. So with that, I think I end my presentation. Yeah. So we hope that we are going to follow by the fruitful discussion later on. So I return this to Pak Hidayat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fadil Hasan. Your presentation is very comprehensive information about the Indonesian economy. I think it is the time to us to have discussion, but for you, Mr. Fadil, I have the brief questions regarding how to finance our economy. When you mentioned about the Fed taper tantrum in the maybe in the 2020 in the first quarter 2022, and when you look at the data from the Professor Oscar about the how the U.S. finance their deficits, it seems like the East part, I mean the country from the East invest too much in the U.S. Budget. So when you look at the future of the financial sector, which is the Fed will stop the QA policy. So do you think we should worry about the financing our economy in that conditions, Pak?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think you're right. There will be a big question. Yeah, how to finance this economy after, for example, the U.S. Start to tapering off, and then also maybe to increase this the fund rate. So then the capital will back to the U.S. Yeah. And for that, I think Indonesia or many countries should respond with various measures. Yeah, one of the choice is that what we are doing now also, yeah, which is we have a burden sharing with the central bank, yeah, to finance the debt deficit that we have, in the budget, and then I think if this things not enough, maybe I think we have also to attract more investment, yeah, to attract more foreign direct investment, yeah, so that I think the what is it, the then we have also to open, yeah, to open the economy, yeah, to foreign direct investment by, for example, change the environment in our regulation, yeah, in ease of doing business in Indonesia, yeah. Basically, we have to reform the bureaucracy, and then, for example, we have also to what I call it, to eliminate or to reduce the corruption practices that so far inhibit the foreign direct investment come to Indonesia. So I think the monetary policy, I think will help, yeah, as we witness so far with the burden sharing scheme with the fiscal authorities, and then also I think we have to really be able to attract more investment to come to Indonesia. That's, I think, the two things that we can do, if the tapering off start to be conducted in the US, and then the Fed start raising their interest rate. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Fadil, for your brief explanations. Now we're going to the next sessions, which is the Q&A sessions. Please, co-host, put the picture of Professor Oscar and Pak Fadil together. So we will invite Pak Aswin Rifai. Pak Aswin, please introduce yourself, Pak, and please deliver the question very briefly.
Okay. Can you hear my voice clearly?
Yes, Pak.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay. I have a question to Professor Oscar. Yeah, at first I'd like to thank Professor Oscar for a very insightful and extraordinary presentation. It's really broadening my understanding on what is the shifting of the economic axis. So, Oscar, there are significant differences between the US and Chinese views of international affairs and globalization due to the divergence regarding the bilateral and multilateral relations and modernization and reforms and the role of non-intervention and regime change in the international affairs, and also that the legitimacy and reality of international order created by advanced economy, and also that the appropriate policy space for common values and interest in global governance. Nevertheless, there are equally significant joint interests for both nations to support global economic integration, right? Even in the adverse circumstances. So, Oscar, what are the lessons of the past crisis of globalization and these new developments? And do you think more inclusive participation of China and other emerging economies should be encouraged to address the globalization crisis? Is the shrinking and imbalance in international trade indicates a very slow recovery of the world economy? So what is your prognosis on this, Professor Oscar?
Please, Professor, you can directly answer the questions. Please turn on your volume, your audio, Prof.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. Yes, I think we have two very different points of view between China and the US. We could appreciate that clearly in black and white with Trump, but it remains. The problem there is leadership. Who leads the way? who has the capacity to lead the way.
Mm.
And that is the problem. If we look at what's happening now, we can see a little bit of what happened after World War II when Great Britain lost global leadership and was replaced by the United States. Of course, it didn't happen from one day to the next. It took a good 20 years for Britain to lose its leadership and for the US to consolidate its leadership in the 1960s, but it took from the 40s to the 60s, so 20 years for this process to happen. And the British had taken over from the French in the early 19th century, you know? So we're in a process of leadership substitution, the hegemony, what it's called. Now, the problem is with leadership, there is one leader. There is no possibility of having two leaders. There is no such a thing as shared leadership. It doesn't exist. The last time somebody tried to do that was between Germany and Britain, and that's because the royal families were cousins. And that ended up in the First World War. So there's no such a thing as shared leadership. Here, what we're going to see, I think, what we're going to see is a fight, and it's going to be a fight over who leads and what values are put in front. What the US is doing now is saying democratic values come in front and other things come in the back. But of course, if you don't look at the numbers, you can understand the argument. But once you look at the numbers, so the democratic values in the US that we finance, what are we talking about? And that's where we have a problem. That's where we have a problem. The other problem is a growing Chinese presence is happening, and that with a Silk and Belt project, it is happening world over. They're investing massively in infrastructure. They're investing in clean energies. They're investing in telecommunications, and that is happening in real time. And the US is being left behind. How the US reacts to this is a matter of concern, because what we are watching in Latin America, which is a space of dispute right now, is that the US sends missions to the different presidents to say, no, don't buy Huawei, don't use the loans for clean energy. We will give you something in exchange. The problem is, what can they give in exchange? They don't have 5G technology, and they are not in clean energy. So they want to substitute China for what China is doing, but they cannot, which increases the conflict between the US and China. And so that's where we are at. And I think that's the whole problem with Taiwan. Taiwan is the example of the conflict. Who is going to lead Taiwan forward? The US or China? The US democracy or Chinese Communist Party? That's the discussion. And of course, who benefits from Taiwan? Who benefits from Taiwan? Who gets the most benefit from production in Taiwan? Is it the US or is it China? Or do they share the benefits? But all of this is a part of what is there. Now, what lessons do we take from the crisis? I think there are a few lessons from the crisis. Some of the things that Mr. Hassan has pointed out are there in terms of economic policy, fiscal policy, monetary policy, except that the degree to which it has been taken in the US is unthinkable anyplace else. Nobody else could do that. 15% of GDP? Who can hold a 15% of GDP deficit? No one. The thing is, who finances that? That's the problem. And the other side of this is who controls the pandemic. The pandemic is controlled in Asia, more or less controlled in Asia. The vaccinations are high in Asia. It's not the case in the United States, where half of the population is not vaccinated. So there's a serious lesson there on what to do right, which was what Asia did right, and what not to do, which is what the US did. So that's another lesson. A third lesson is that all of the imbalances add up to zero. And let's remember that. All of the imbalances always add up to zero. So whoever has a growing imbalance is going to suck up resources from the rest. And if the rest starts going back, the one that has a growing imbalance is going to have to reduce it. Because it adds up to zero, always. So that's another lesson. And finally, I think we have a problem here, a double problem I have been working on. One is the problem of the government debts. Governments have been spending more money, etc. But what has happened mostly is that GDP contracted substantially, so the debt ratios jumped. The debt ratios jumped because GDP contracted 8%, 10%, 6%. So that's a massive jump. The total level of debt did grow a little bit, but the denominator shrunk. And that gave what happened on the other side is the fiscal problem. The massive fiscal problem that appeared in 2020 when revenues dropped 20, 30% of GDP. No, 20 or 30%. And that drop, that dramatic drop, is going to have to be recovered. And the recovery of the fiscal pressure is going to take time, because the recovery of the fiscal pressure goes together with economic recovery. And economic recovery, as Mr. Hassan has pointed out, and so have I, is going to be slower. Now, I have the impression it's an inverted square root, where the right side is lower than the left side. So it's not quite a W. It's like, it goes up and then it sort of dwindles down. But the problem with this is, how do you recover taxes if the economy doesn't recover? And that's where the Yellen came in with a 21% proposal of a flat rate, which was a good proposal. And the Irish said, no, 15%, because that's our rate. And that was the end of that. And at 15%, not every country is going to sign in, because other countries have higher corporate taxes than 15%. So, well, let's see what happens with that. But anyway, so we have a massive fiscal problem all over the world. And that has to be addressed. But the other thing that has to be addressed is that we did 2020 and all of the health projects with austerity policies. I think that's wrong. I think we should have had expansionary policies. And we should have reduced our levels of international reserves and not have them grown. And then, even worse, to make matters worse, then the IMF turned around and said, you need special drawing rights. For what? We have more international reserves than we have ever had. And they issued special drawing rights because they had as a diagnosis that there was an external problem. there was no external problem. They have an external problem, we don't. So those are a few things to keep in mind. I think the last thing is inflation. What's happened with inflation this time around is new, because what happened in 2020 was new. We had never had all of the supply side shut down in the world. Never. That never happened, not even during the world wars. Factories kept on working. In some countries, they did not work in others, but in some countries, they kept on working. In 2020, all factories shut down everywhere. And at the same time, consumers locked themselves inside. So you had a shutdown of supply and a shutdown of demand. And then we said, okay, now let's go back to normal. And you have to synchronize production. Just the just-on-time concept is based on synchronization. Factory A produces, so factory B produces, so factory C produces, and all the way up to factory Z. Now, what happens when factory A is not producing and factory C starts producing? You have a problem of supplies. They are not getting enough inputs. And then factory C is producing, but D is producing less than they should. And I will give you the example that how we identified the problem with my team at the Economic Observatory. What we saw was an Italian paint factory that produces the white titanium paint for cars in Italy. They were selling the paint via the internet. So one of my assistants walks into, no, he doesn't walk into my cubicle, walks into the Zoom and says, Professor, they're selling titanium paint in the internet. I said, why? Why are they selling titanium paint in the internet? Because the factory that was producing titanium paint for cars opened up in Italy. But the car factories in the US, Mexico, and Brazil were shut down. And they were also shut down in Great Britain and in Europe. So they had the paint, but not the cars. And that's when we first noticed there was a synchronization problem. Synchronization problems have led to inflation because they're bottlenecks. That's one thing. The second side is the delivery problem. Because there's a supply problem, there's a delivery problem. So you have a second element. The third element is the droughts. We have had, over the past several years, droughts that have risen the prices of food around the world. And now we have to watch if in 2022 we are going to again have a drought like in 2021 and 2020. And if we do, inflation is going to rise even more. And the last element is the US monetary policy. When they injected the $3 trillion into the US economy, that went way beyond the US economy because it went into the commodity markets. And that rose commodity prices, as we saw in the graph of Mr. Hassan. Commodity prices rose dramatically starting in March of 2020. And that's when the money was put in. Well, high commodity prices, you have high economic growth in the primary export countries. So you're pushing prices around the world as an effect of a domestic US policy to reactivate its market. But that it went around the world. So you have those four components into inflation now. And that gives you a new aspect of inflation. So now, when they say, let's raise interest rates. Okay, let's. Inflation is going to be controlled a little bit, yes. But the structural aspects of inflation will not until production is synchronized, and then that will go down, until food production becomes regular because droughts go away and we start having rains again. That will help. If that does not happen, inflation will continue higher than average. So we don't really know what inflation is going to look like. There are people, all kinds of people guessing, but I mean, it's for you to guess, no?
So you don't
yeah, I think that's basically, I mean, that's an overall picture.
you don't agree with the suggestion prediction of Mr. Fadil, which is the second semester in 2022 will be declining in the price, commodity price. No.
Yeah, well, if interest rates go up as they are supposed to in the starting now, we should be having an interest rate rise now in December, and we're going to start having them consistently the first semester of next year. That should push prices down in the commodities market and in the stocks market, both. And that will affect our GDP growth. It will affect inflation positively. It will bring down inflation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Oscar.
I have a comment.
Yes, Pak Fadil, please.
Yeah, I think what Professor Oscar mentioned is right. That's why I think when the U.S. start to increase the interest rate, and I think it's really followed by also by other central banks countries, right? And then with that, I think there will be some movement in the capital, of course, to the what I call it, to the US especially, and that's, I think, when we have to be very careful, because it's going to what I call it, cause the price of commodities declining. Because so far what we see that the increase in the price of commodities not solely caused by the increase in the demand. For example, in our the data that I know, for example, the volume of our export for palm oil, for example, from Indonesia, does not change very much, So
the price changed dramatically.
But the price increased. That's why the price increased, not because of the increase in the demand. Volume doesn't increase.
Right. Exactly.
But
that's the point. That's the point.
Because of the, you are saying that.
Yeah. That's a problem.
Interesting.
Money, what you call it, went to the commodity market. That's what the caused the price of commodity increase. So thank you very much.
That is the distortion I was talking about.
Yes.
When you have those massive negative interest rates, everything gets distorted.
Yes.
And we looked at the volumes, and we were trying to follow the argument of the Wall Street Journal that said that commodity prices were growing because of Chinese economic recovery. And we could not see volumes growing. Volumes are not growing. What is growing is prices. And those prices are artificially growing, like the stock market is artificially growing. So all of that is just negative interest rate. Now, can they raise the interest rate from -6 to 0? The 6% rise? Can they take it to an equilibrium point? Or are we going to live for the next 5 years with all of these distortions and continue financing the distortion? So that's the problem. We are paying for this.
It is interesting, and I think it is we face in not only one country. This is totally older country. We're facing the higher price in the commodity.
Yes.
So
and interest rates are going to go up everywhere.
So it is like the structural problem that we have today. So how we solve that problem, Prof? Because the problem is not volume, as you said, it's not related with demand, but it is because the policy of the financial sector did. What the solution for that?
I don't know.
Okay,
that's a damn good question.
yeah.
It's a very good question.
Big, but very. Yeah.
Okay,
question.
we will back to Dr. Aswin Rifai, who has the first time emerged this question. Pak Aswin, please your feedback. Can you turn on your voice? Okay.
I think we have to, let's say, in terms of global trade. Yeah. Now, China is dominating the global trade, but I think for the rest of the world, I hope that maybe we can force US, not force. I mean that we should advise US or something like that. That US should play more roles. I mean, his role in trade should be more dominant compared. Try to balance the Chinese also, and also to how to say that US should be more try to balance Chinese also, and try to be more proactive. I mean, so I don't know how is it possible or not, but I think that is the way to remedy the global trade. I think. What do you think, Professor Oscar?
Yeah. The answer is very difficult to answer, Pak Rifai. Yeah. Prof, I cannot hear your voice. Sorry, you not turn on your volume. No, just turn on.
Still muted.
Yes, still muted.
Okay.
Okay.
The US cannot compete right now with China.
It's the
It
fact.
does not have the technology. So, but it should
saying
export more. The
okay,
US should export more, yes. The
Yeah.
US should export more, should import a lot less. They should be producing much more at home, generating more economic growth at home, because they have the levels of growth in the US are ridiculously small.
So the Trump is right, Professor.
And the productivity problem, they have a very serious productivity problem.
In what
and
you
they're
say,
turning a blind
Professor, I'm
eye.
sorry. In what you said, so the President Trump, it's right when the Trump talking about how to produce more in the US.
Yes.
So
the way I think
he was right. I mean, the diagnosis was correct. What was wrong was the strategy. Because if you put the blame on China, you're not getting anywhere. I mean, get your act together and start producing. Stop blaming the world. Huh? Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Fadil, please.
Yeah, I mean,
be responsible.
The way to what do you call it, to increase the role of the US, to make this trade deficit reduction. It's not by protectionism policies, but to increase the productivity, that's what but the US so far, I think, behave like third world countries, trying to.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like. And it reminds me of Great Britain. That's what happened to the British economy. And look at the British economy now. It's a disaster. The productive sector started falling apart. And instead of strengthening it, they said, no, let's get rid of it. And here we are.
Interesting, Professor. So we have another participant here in the chat room. We have Mrs. Rahmasari Fahria and the Muhammad Amin. Maybe both of you can show yourself and give the speaker on. Maybe you can answer. Maybe you can deliver your question directly to the professor, please. Mrs. Rahmasari Fahira.
Okay. Pak Ahmad Nur Hidayat, thank you. Professor Oscar, I just want to say that I want to thank you for answering my previous questions via chat room. Thank you. Then I have second question. Okay, second question. In your opinion, what are the main policies of U.S. government in their economic relation with China to anticipate this China's aggressiveness? Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Please, Mr. Oscar.
Good question. What are the main policies? The US main policies to face China's aggressiveness.
So
I have the
actually,
impression it is not facing China's aggressiveness. The Chinese are on the top of clean energy technology, are on the top of 5G technology and telecommunications, and have turned into the leading lenders in Latin America and Africa. And they're also the leading investors in Latin America and Africa. And the US cannot help it. And it cannot help. What the US did was name a person from the US National Security Council, this Mr. Claver Caron, to the Inter-American Development Bank, so that the Inter-American Development Bank will put money in place of the money where the Chinese put money. But the question there is, if they put the money, do they have the technology? Because the money doesn't go for free. The money goes for something. And what is coming from China are massive integration infrastructure projects, huge ports, and that's facilitating world trade for all of our countries. So when you come around and say, okay, I'm going to put in this money, with what technology? Does the US have the technology China has for the ports? My impression is that no, all of the new ports are Chinese. And if they're not Chinese, they are near Chinese, British Chinese. But the US cannot compete because the costs in the US are very high. Very high, and they cannot compete. And that's the problem. And that's why they turn aggressive. The US blames everything on China because it cannot face China. But that's like a teenager, no? Saying that the blame is somebody else's and not taking responsibility on what it's doing. Yeah.
Blaming someone, sometimes it's a signal that you don't have any capability to the capture. Yeah,
you're not right. You have to blame somebody else, but you're not right. No? Yeah.
Okay, Prof. Thank you, Mr. Rahmasari. Do you want to have the feedback? I will show you, Professor, with the data here that I get from the IMF. It is the domestic debt. When you look at the data here, emerging market and developing economies, that the past 2 decades, the share of the domestic debt has risen from 31% to 46%. The total sovereign debts. So when you look at this data, did the trends, do you think will increase in the more proportional of the total debt? So when you look at the domestic data, is more heavy in the sovereign debts, it still have the stability, right? I mean, when the country have the domestic, the finance, it's deep, it's deficit by the people, his own people. So it's become more stable in terms of the financial things. What do you think, Prof, about this?
Well, what happens with domestic debt, and I have been working on this, I have been working on the several issues that have to do with this fiscal problems and the debt, the government debts. But I have also looked at those debts, the private debts, for one reason. You cannot have an economic recovery with bankrupt firms. That does not happen. And what we are watching, and I am watching it every day in the newspapers, is firms going under. If all of the firms go under, nobody's going to recover, right? So the solution, I say, is why don't we propose, I am proposing this, let's have central banks open a guarantee window where the firms give the central bank their pledges, the collateral. The central bank issues a letter of guarantee. The firm goes to the capital markets and issues a bullet bond, 3 or 5 years or whatever, 10 years, issues a bullet bond, big bullet bond, to pay back everybody else and get some money to start working. And that way, we can start getting the economy recovered and pay back the debts to the central bank. But because I don't think, and this is a serious problem, when GDPs contract 10% or 15%, as we have seen in Latin America, everything shuts down. Restaurants, hotels, airlines, theaters, small manufacturing firms, large manufacturing firms, export firms. Everything goes bankrupt. And we need to have a mechanism, a central bank guarantee mechanism, that will allow these firms to issue bullet bonds in their capital markets to get on with it. And because it's a bullet bond, they don't need to pay anything during the payback period, the initial payback period, and they can recover the rhythm of work and get the economy rolling again. I think that's the only way forward, and that will probably make that curve go down. It's gone up to 46% or something. That will probably make that go down. Because as you issue these things and you start recovering the GDP, you start paying it back, it tapers. I think that's the only way forward. I don't see any other way forward. In international negotiations, we can have a board of arbitration. We can have several new mechanisms to negotiate foreign debts. But for domestic debts and for foreign firms that have foreign debts, you have a foreign investor in your country that owes money abroad. What you need to do is to have him convert that debt into domestic debt to take away the exchange risk and to take away the interest rate risk, because you know what the interest rate is going to be in your country. In the other country where they're borrowed, who knows? And even if it costs a little more, it will be much more stable. And that's my position on all of this domestic debt question. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Oscar. Pak Fadil, you have more information about the central bank, our central bank in Indonesia. In my understanding, our central bank cannot buy the corporate security, right? Yeah. So if the Mr. Oscar suggestions we prefer, I think it is logic. But the problem is we have the legal challenge.
But you're not buying anything. You're issuing a guarantee.
Issuing
a guarantee. The central bank issues a guarantee, and it's not injecting money at all. It is issuing a guarantee for the firm to do bullet bonds in the capital markets with a central bank guarantee.
Interesting. What's your opinion, Pak Fadil?
Yeah, I think first of all that there are a lot of countries that has the independent central bank, right? So the main focus is on the how to manage inflation, right? So not like in the US, for example, in which the central bank also has the function on how to reduce the unemployment. Yeah, but in Indonesia, for example, the main focus is on the inflationary, what we targeting, something like that. So for that to happen, as suggestion by Professor Oscar, I think we have somehow to change the regulation, the laws regarding the central banks. But the idea itself, I think very interesting, but to do that, I think in permanent basis, for example, we have to change the law, because now in Indonesia, even in Indonesia, the independency central bank is not does not apply anymore, because now, Professor Oscar, for your information, the central bank has the the burden sharing scheme, in which the central bank buy
Mandatory
the
mandatory
government
financing.
bond,
Yeah.
government bond at the rate that vary between the public's
The market
purpose and then the market, the commercial market interest rate. So, but it's only but this will up to the 2022. After that we have to go back to the
normal
case in which the central bank cannot be allowed to buy the government bond. So while the idea itself is very interesting, I think to be applied to Indonesia and also for many countries, somehow I think the regulation has to be changed regarding the central bank.
And it can be done with not a permanent thing, but an extraordinary
yes
policy.
And it's a window, a guarantee window, and the central bank will receive the collateral.
I see.
So if anything goes wrong with a firm, the central bank executes the collateral. That's it.
Yeah.
So the central bank will not be lending money to anyone. No, that's not because I have been for years working with central banks, and I know the restrictions they have, and I remember trying to work out the debt swaps 30 years ago, and I would bump into central bank autonomy. No, we cannot do debt swaps because we would be lending money to the Ministry of Finance. But nonsense. Nonsense. But anyway.
Thank you, Professor Oscar.
Right.
We have the Professor Jomo here. He's from Malaysia. Professor
Yes.
Jomo, if you have any comment or feedback about our discussion, it will happy. I'm really happy. Please, Professor Jomo.
Thank you very much, Pak Hidayat. Hello. Hola, Oscar.
Hola. ¿Cómo estás? Nice to see you again. I see you black. I don't see you at all.
Yeah.
You have behind you.
I have been expelled from I don't have lights.
Why?
So I'm not one of the enlightened ones, but let me try to address the debate you have just had, because what Fadil said is very important. What we have in Indonesia is a temporary suspension of the previous existing central bank regulations. But what you have seen, what Philippines has done, has gone further. They have actually changed the law. But I think the important thing to emphasize is that there are many different types of arrangements which can be made. So the central bank can buy government debt without going to the market. Just go and buy directly government debt without going to the market. The problem with going to the market is that you are still subjected to the vagaries of the market and different types of possible market manipulation. Which you want to try to avoid, especially in such an emergency situation. What I usually don't quote the World Bank, but what the World Bank has been saying recently is that Southeast Asian countries are not taxing enough. Now, this is a very good time to introduce taxes, because there are going to be very little collection from those taxes. So the resistance to the introduction of new taxes will be less. But it is important to have more participation in Southeast Asia in the longer term, as well as to resist this competition to try to lower income tax. And we have an important situation now with what Janet Yellen proposed, and other people, including Oscar, have been proposing in terms of having a global corporate income tax. There is now the real possibility of a real taxation. So what many of us have been doing in Southeast Asia has been to lower or even to give tax holidays to foreign direct investment. But now we have the real possibility of introducing global corporate income tax, so that loophole is no longer there. But the big problem now is because the whole process is being controlled by the OECD, the distribution of the tax which is collected is now mainly on the basis of consumption. So if Indonesia produces goods which are exported, but and which is largely consumed in somewhere else, Indonesia will not get any revenue, because the proposed taxation by the OECD is to distribute on the basis of consumption, ignoring production. So developing countries have to do much more to make sure because we are the producers of the primary commodities. We are the producers increasingly of some manufactured commodities. We need to capture much more of that. So I think this is a very, very important time because of and the rules are all suspended. Yeah? Nobody believes that the old status quo is acceptable anymore. And now, in the old Cold War, many of us in developing countries were able to take advantage of the rivalry between the Soviet Union and the US. In fact, when the Soviet Union challenged the US to eradicate smallpox, within 10 years, smallpox was gone. So you can get something. So this US-China rivalry can be important, but we are now passive spectators. We in Southeast Asia, in my view, should revive the spirit of having a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality, and to stop all these Western powers coming here to Southeast Asia, certainly to defend us against China. We should be actively neutral, not to take sides with the US or with China, because there will be consequences of doing that, but to be actively neutral to try to change our role. And I think Indonesia, being the leading country in the region, can play a very important role. Let me stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jomo. Professor Oscar, do you have any feedback?
No, I agree entirely.
Okay.
I agree entirely.
Okay, because we are running out of time, so we should close these sessions. It is special thanks to you, Professor, especially for the Professor Jomo has joined these discussions. Thank you to all our speakers today, and thank you again, Professor Oscar and Dr. Fadil Hasan, for your very bright and provoking thinking and smart presentations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all participants for the attending the sessions. And I will say thank you also to Dean FEB UPN VJ, Ms. Dian Wicaksi and Mr. Fahru, and our colleagues from UPN VJ for the arranging the session and give me a chance to become a moderator. If you have additional question for the presenter, you can email them maybe, and presenter our speaker may answer you. And I would like to apologize if any mistake from me as the moderator during the sessions. Just for information, if you are late to join our session, don't worry, because you can rewatch the recording from the FEB UPN VJ YouTube page. We hope you learned something today, and if you find this session informative and useful, please don't hesitate to share what you guys got in your social media, you can tag at FEB-UPNVJ on your Instagram or your Facebook, or you can simply show support by giving thumb up and subscribe to FEB-UPNVJ channel. Well, I am Ahmad Nur Hidayat. That's all from me. Have a great rest for your day, and until next time, we will see you again in another session, which is the parallel sessions and the young research sessions. Send back to you, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
thank
Mr.
you.
Ahmad Nur Hidayat, Prof. Oscar, and also Dr. Fadir for super insightful discussion. Now I would like to invite the Dean of Faculty of Economic and Business UPN Veteran Jakarta for pass on the certificate to our honorable speaker, to Dr. Dian Wicaksi. The time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Professor Oscar, hello, Professor Oscar. Welcome to Indonesia virtually. Yeah, Professor Oscar. Thank you, Professor Oscar, for the remarkable topics and presentation. Please accept this certificate to appreciate your time and your material and your discussion today.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully, we can meet offline. You can visit Bali or Indonesia next year, Professor
Yes,
Oscar.
yes, I hope to. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that.
Okay.
Indeed.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Next is Professor Fadil Hasan. Amin. Professor Pak Dr. Fadil Hasan, thank you. Mana ini Pak Fadil Hasan? Amin. Professor Fadil Hasan, thank you for insightful discussion and topic and material today. Please accept this certificate as our appreciation of your time and your insightful speak and material today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dian. Next, I would like to call Mr. Fahru Afrian, PhD, as Head of Economic Science Program UPN Veteran Jakarta, to give the certificate to our Honorable Moderator, Mr. Ahmad Nur Hidayat. So, Mr. Fahru, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Thank you. I would like to give the certificate to Mr. Ahmad Nur Hidayat to thank for his participation as moderator in today's discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Farhud. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Fahru. And once again, thank you so much for our honorable speakers today, Prof. Oscar and also Dr. Fadil. And also thank you so much for our outstanding moderator, Mr. Ahmad Nur Hidayat. I am Liza Fabrina. As today Master of Ceremony, will leave you with a quote by Stewart Brand, an author and innovative thinker, who once said, "We can see the past, but not influence it. We can influence the future, but not see it." May all of us be guided by all the things we have learned and heard through today's event, and be able to see and influence our future. I am Liza Fabrina, as today Master of Ceremony. Apologize for any mistake. Thank you, everyone. Wabillahi taufiq walhidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih bisa
Pak Fadil nggak tahu kemana ya.